Okay, so it's part 2 of COMP2084 lesson 2. So most of us have managed to get a database set up on Azure now. I'm going to go through the process one more time of how do we connect to that database in Management Studio. I'm recording it, but this is the last time I'm going to go through it. So if you don't catch it this time, you can watch the video. So when you open up Management Studio, which I recommend you pin somewhere convenient because you're going to need it each week, open it up. And as I suggested, when you create the database, I suggested making a text file with the 4 pieces of information about your database, right? The server name, which will be something.database.windows.net. Database name here. Keep these credentials. Now we need to just simply copy and paste each of these values, because as soon as Management Studio opens, it gives you this login window. So grab the server name, which ends in .database.windows.net, copy it. Don't worry about the fact this is a dropdown, just paste it into that first list. You don't have to select from the list, you can just overwrite what's there. Under the authentication dropdown, make sure you pick SQL Server Authentication. Windows authentication is not going to work here. We have to authenticate with a username and a password. Copy and paste the login and password. Check remember password. But before you connect, notice there's nowhere here for us to enter the name of the database. That's on the next tab. So if you click the options button, it jumps you from the login tab to the connection properties. Connect to database. Again, I don't recommend clicking that drop down because then it tries to search. It's slow. Just copy and paste your database name in there. Where you can see it's highlighted in blue. Everything else you can leave. You paste in the host, paste in the username, password, check remember password, copy and paste your database name. Once you've done all those things, you can click connect. And if you've enabled the firewall to allow all IPs from 0 to 255, it should connect. You only have to set this up once, right? Notice I've already set up my music store database, so it remembers every time I come back here, it's in the list of saved connections. So all I have to do is just choose it and click connect. You only have to set it up once. When we come back, we just choose the stored connection next time. So it's only kind of complicated once. But now our connection is saved for good. And then you expand. So if this is your assignment, you can then just go in here and create the tables. Right? I can just go in, create a new table, and use this. You can write a create table script, or you can actually just use the visual editor to build your columns, column names, data types. I think I showed this last week, right? So it will look like this. Right, again, I'll just use building out Luis's project form. You're welcome. Right, so it's an integer, that's not null. I right click and that's my primary key. And if I want the values to be auto assigned, I just go down here to this is identity. Change that from no to yes. That's the equivalent of an auto increment in MySQL. Right? The database will assign it. Right. And now I just want to save that and give it a name. Call it exercises. So you don't have to write an SQL create table script. If you prefer to, that's fine. You just click on new query, you get a query editor, write a create table command. This is faster. And you don't have to deal with syntax errors. So to create your 2 tables this way is really pretty quick. Make sure your ID fields are set as primary key and change the identity from no to yes in your assignment. Okay, let's finally open up our music store and let's get it talking to our music store database. Doesn't really matter whether you're using a local database, your Azure, my Azure, whatever. So we'll open it up, we'll get it to run. Virginia contagious. She works fast. You poisoned you, she ran away. Okay, so here's our store as we've left it. So right now it's not connected to any database. So here's what we want to do. First thing we need to do is open up our web.config file right down here at the bottom. Now our web.config already has a database connection in it. You notice on line 14 and 15, it has a connection string called default connection, and it actually points to our data directory, which is this folder, app data. And it gives a date stamp of when, timestamp, and it gives it an MDF extension. That's a Microsoft data format. That's the file format of our SQL Server databases. So this just creates a local copy. We don't really want this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out line 14, 15. You can either type the comments or I just use this comment button on my toolbar. We want to disable it. I'll explain why. This name for our connection string, default connection, we can call our connection strings anything we want, but the packages Microsoft uses for doing authentication, they expect our connection string to be called default connection. If we call our database connection something else, those packages won't actually work for doing user sign-up and authorization. So we could delete this line. I'll just keep it there so we know it was once here, but we're going to create a separate connection string called default connection. But this time it's going to be connected to our music store database instead. Allie? Don't worry about it. You don't see it? Don't worry about it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we're going to use the Entity Framework library. Entity Framework in some ways is kind of like PDO in the PHP MySQL world, right? PDO was an interface, was a data access library that let our PHP pages connect to a database with the username, password, host, and database name, and then execute commands against that database, like insert, update, delete. Entity Framework does that. It's kind of the bridge between our web application and our database, but it does more. PDO is just simply for doing data access only. Entity Framework is actually what's known as an ORM tool. Anybody worked with an ORM before, even knows what this acronym means? What's it mean? Okay, what does it mean? You're close. Its object is right. It's an object relationship mapper. It's basically a way of taking our database and modeling or replicating that database in our application code. So Entity Framework is going to do this. So we're going to use the Entity Framework to do two things. Actually, it's going to do three things. It's going to build a database connection class. It's going to create a connection string in our web.config that points to our database. And it's going to build a model for every table in our database automatically with a few clicks. So and all this is going to happen inside our models folder. So right click your models, choose add, and we want a new item. It defaults to the web section because that's what we've been adding. What we need is not in the web section. It's up here under data. So we could use this connection object in any kind of Visual Studio application that talks to a database. We could use this in a Windows form. We could use it in a mobile app. We can use it in an API. So we want this ADO.NET entity data model. And I'm going to rename it from model 1. I'm going to rename it to music store model. You don't need to give it an extension. Music store model, no spaces. So you may get a screen that's a little bit different from mine. Some of you may only have 2 options here, some of you have 4. So what we want is we want code first from database. We have an existing database. We want to generate models based on the tables we already have. If you pick this option, that would be we've already designed class objects and we want to build tables based on those classes. So you can do either one. I'm going to do this model based on an existing database. Click Next. Your screen will look a little different than mine, most likely. I'm just going to click this so mine will look like yours. You probably have a screen similar to this first. No? What screen do you have? What does it say? Because we added it last week, didn't we? Right, okay. So you can either, if you used my music store from last week, it's probably in this list, the COMP2007 afternoon. If it's not there, pick new connection. I think I clicked it, maybe I didn't. Yeah. Because it's searching for any stored connections. I did. There we go. So the data source should be Microsoft SQL Server. If you have this window, pick Microsoft SQL Server and check always use this action. Then it won't ask you what type of database again. It will assume it's SQL Server. So now it wants those same credentials. So if you've set up your own music store database, you can put in those credentials. If you haven't, we're going to use the same ones I put up last week, right? So the server name, if you need to connect to mine, COMP2007 afternoon, database.windows.net. Or some of you set the music store up locally. If you want to run it locally, that's fine. You just put in your local server and then you could use Windows authentication. If you're connecting to my Azure database, COMP2007 afternoon.database.windows.net, we need SQL Server authentication. There's our username, MVCDBA. Here's the password. So put that in and check save my password so it doesn't prompt you again. Click on Set Server Firewall. Go to the overview of your database. It will be in the Navbar. Set Server Firewall. Create a rule, call it anything, from all zeros to all 255s. If you've got your own, I would prefer you use your own, yes. It'll also run more, it's going to slow mine down if everyone's connecting to mine, so better to use yours. Use mine if need be. Make sure you choose save password, and then in here, the database name is music store. I can click test. Oops, that's not going to work because I left out an S. So I'll just have to let this fail. Database.windows with S. That's why my database name didn't come up here. And now I've locked it, so I got to wait, let it fail, fix it. Yes, that server doesn't exist. It's this one. If you get it right, when you start typing the database name, it eventually comes up. So I know my connection's going to work. It already found the right database name. So I'll test it. And then just click OK. So there's our server, COMP2000 afternoon, database.windows.net, MVC passwords on the board if you need mine. If you have your own music store database set up, so much the better. So I'll click OK. So now I get a few options here. Do I want the sensitive information in the connection string? Yes. Now, here's the other thing we need to change. Save this in web.config. It will default to music store model. This is where we need our keyword, connection string keyword, default connection with no spaces. Our authentication libraries are going to look for this name. So be sure you call your connection default connection and choose yes to this option. Click next. So now it's going to load the objects in our database. Yep. That's why I commented out this section, which you said you didn't have. You probably had, but maybe didn't see. You may have opened the wrong web.config file, Ali. There are two. There's one inside of views and there's one in the project root. So I think you opened the one inside of views. The connection string is in the one that's in the root. It's the very last file project, line 14 and 15. Yep. So here, if I expand the tables, if you're connected to my database, you see all these tables. There's the 6 tables in the script I gave you, and then there's a bunch that start with ASP.NET. We're not interested in those, so we're interested in album, artist, cart, genre, order detail. So select the second and third tables and the bottom 4. If you're using your own database, you'll only have those 6 tables, so you can just select all the tables. If you're connecting to my database, just pick those 6. You had a question over here? Well, if you're using the music store, the tables, you have to run the script that's on Blackboard to create those tables, right? I did it in mine. So if you just made your own database, you probably downloaded that script already. If not, it's on Blackboard. Just download it, open it up here. Just do File, Open File. So if you click on File, Open File, browse to that SQL script. It'll open it in the query editor. Click the Execute button. But you'll need to do that first before you can grab the get the models built. Okay. Yeah. So in that case, do File, Open File, and execute that script to build your tables. Just click Previous. Go to the previous screen, run the script, and then click Next. So now I'll click Finish, and this will build 6 models, a database connection class, and 1 model for each table I picked. So I'll have an album model. You're also going to get this popping up. It says, hey, the web.config file, which is opened, the code's been changed. Do you want to reload with the changes? We can just say yes to this, because this wizard wrote the database connection string into web.config for us. We don't have to do it ourselves. No problem, Nick. Sorry, just give me 1 second, Nathaniel. So you can see now on line 14, here's my default connection with my Azure credentials. Okay, Nathaniel, yeah.
Which database?
There are no views, so just the tables. Right, so a view would be, let's say we've written a query. We have a complicated query that involves a whole bunch of tables that we want, we know we're going to have a use for in our application. We can create that as a view, and it's stored as a database object. So we could include that as a model if we wanted to. So it's basically a stored query, in effect. So we don't have any. Vlad? That's fine. It's not going to harm your computer. Yep. Yeah. Okay, if that's the case, you may just have to cancel out of the wizard and start it again. So here's the database connection class that it opens. Notice it uses our connection. It inherits from DB contexts. And it also includes all of the relationships between the models. So wherever there's primary foreign key relationships, one-to-manys in our database, those are modeled here. So for example, one album appears in many carts. One album is in many order details. One artist has many albums. So if we've created those relationships in the database, the entity framework wizard actually models all those relationships here. I think you may have picked a different option from me. That's okay. That will still work. That's kind of old. Did it ask you what version of Entity Framework? It may have been Entity Framework 5. It should still work though, Vlad, so I wouldn't worry about it. Question? Just leave that however it was, just leave it. Are you connecting to your own database or to mine? Okay, so local or on Azure? Okay, so yes, you're having the same issue as these two guys. You have a database, but it's blank. So are you connected to your database here? Okay, so there's an SQL script on Blackboard in last week's folder, Music Store SQL, download that file. Once you download it, you click File, Open File, browse to it, and open, and it'll open that whole script file in a query window. Just one quick trick before you do. Make sure, sometimes when you do that, this defaults to the master database. So in this dropdown, make sure the database you created is selected, then just click Execute. And then you can run through that wizard again and all your tables. So you may have to cancel out of the wizard in Visual Studio, build the tables, then run the wizard again, and then it will find the tables. Here, album, artist, cart, genre, and order details. So the last two, and album to genre. Those are the tables you need. Default connection. Ali? Say yes. Doesn't matter. We've only changed one file. So because we have the file open and Visual Studio is trying to write changes to it, it's asking if you want to accept them because Visual Studio is putting in the connection string. It's adding this line that connects to the database. So we don't have to write it. Visual Studio is going to write the connection string for us if we just provide the credentials, which is nice. We don't have to write that and worry about messing up the syntax. So once that's done, we better build the solution. So our solution now contains 7 models, a database connection model, and then 6 models, each one based on one of our music store tables. So just do a build. We won't see any visual change to the project. We haven't changed the front end of it at all. We've just set it up so that it can talk to our database. So that's a one-time thing. We don't have to do this again. Right? We set the database up. We just, once we're happy with the database, then we use that model to go ahead, write the connection string, and build our model files. This is kind of the neat part. We have an albums controller. We're going to blow this controller away. So go to controllers, delete your albums controller. Now we're going to build a new one, but we're going to let Visual Studio do it for us, and it's going to be a lot better than the one we built on our own. So right-click controllers, choose Add, and pick controller. So far, we've built empty controllers. What are we going to pick this time? Yeah, we want controller with views using Entity Framework. So we're going to pick that option. We're going to pick our album model. And we're going to pick our music store model as the data context class. Make sure our layout template is selected, and it will automatically be called albums controller if it's based on the album model. Now just click the add button. So Visual Studio is going to build our controller, and it's going to build 5 album views. So here's the controller. This is one of the questions that was in the quiz, right? About referencing the models. If this controller is going to access our album object, it needs a reference to our model's namespace. We have all the code we need to create, read, update, and delete albums. We have an index view, a details view, create, edit, and delete. If we scroll down to our views, we now have 5 views called create, delete, details, edit, and index. Let's see how these work. So let's build. And if we go to our albums, URL localhost/albums, this is going to load the index view that Visual Studio scaffolded. It auto-generated. So now we've got a page with a complete list of all the data, all 246 or 7 albums in the database. We can create. And notice, because of those relationships, that every album has a genre and every album has an artist, it auto-generates these as drop-downs for us. If we edit, same thing. We've got the drop-downs, but they're selected to the correct values. If we delete something, it gives us a confirmation first. All of these views are fully functional. If I want to change something here, so this album, I want to put it on sale. We'll give people a whopping $1 off. Right? So all of this works. If you want to try and add an album, you can. You'll see it's going to get added to the list. So we actually have written no code at all to generate a model, a view, model, a whole bunch of views, and a controller. So this is largely what I'm asking you to do for the assignments. As you can see, coming back to your question, how long does it take? Well, once your database is set up and you've set up the models, well, right click, controller, adds, wait for it to be finished, build. Now, this isn't totally finished. So what we're gonna do and what we're gonna do the rest of the class today, and we'll kind of divide and conquer the tasks, is we'll identify, this is just a starting point, right? You couldn't hand this to a client and say, I'm done, pay me, here you go, right? These are not production ready. They're functional, but they're not really finished. So we should think about what things would we need to change here with the scaffolded views. How would we change this so this would be closer to a finished product? Some of those changes we need to make directly in the views. Some of them we may have to make in the controller, in the logic layer, and a few of them we'd even have to make in the model layer, the back end. So let's make a list, shall we? As you look here, so click through your views, what things would we need to change before somebody would consider that these pages are done? What's one element on here you think should be changed or upgraded? Nathaniel? Okay, so actually displaying the images rather than just a path to the image. Okay, so yes, so we will display album images on the index. Yep. What else would you change? Jake? Right, so it says index here and here, right? So whatever's the method name is, it just spits that out. So yeah, we want to change the index page heading. Who somebody said CSS? We could. Yes, we will add. Yes, we will definitely add to cart. Probably not today, but probably next week we'll add to cart. So here's the. Yeah. So this page, would be the admin area. This would be for managing the store, but we will need another view that's public. So today these are all public. In the next week or two, we're going to make these views private. Yeah. So we will get to that. So yes, we're getting there. But even from a CSS perspective, there's a few basic ways we could improve the look of this page. What would be the most basic way we could improve this table with CSS? Okay. Yeah, that might be a good idea. That's kind of what I was thinking of. So alternate row background index table. So at least they're a little easier to see. Yep. Any other ways we can improve it, Nathaniel? Okay. Yeah, so adding a search. Okay, hang on. So filter by artist. We may not have time to do this. This one, that's a good idea. We may run out of time to do this one, but yes, sorting, right? So right now, how are these albums presented? In what order? Luis? Yeah, that's by the album ID. If we add a new album, right? Because I added one in class on Monday, puts it on the bottom. So these are just by ID, right? This is album ID 669, this is 678. So it's not really sortable at all. So probably we should set the default order. So when this loads, what kind of sort order would make sense by default? Okay, yeah, so probably by name. But then we also have artists that have multiple albums. Yeah, so maybe first by artist name, then by album title. Right? So we'll want to do that. Album. And sorry, so it would be artist name. album title. Sorry? Bone of a year. No, there's no field for that. So not only should we pre-sort the list, how do we typically, what do we do to allow users to sort data in their own way? What's the typical way when we give them a table on a web page? Yeah, we could make these, we could invoke a little JavaScript so that when we click, it sorts on any column first one way, click it again, it sorts the other way. Okay. So maybe we'll do that. Makes sense. Anything else on this page? There's one, to me, you guys have hit on most of them. There's one glaringly obvious problem that no one has mentioned yet. Sorry? Okay, so first of all, there's no way, that's a good point. There's no way to get here other than typing the URL. So we probably want to add a link to the Navbar. That one's pretty easy. We're going to say something else. Well, actually, none of them are mislabeled, but this is one of the warnings when you use scaffolding, right? Where do those column headings come from? Yeah, those directly come from our models, which come from our database headings. So, you know, we don't put spaces in our database column names, but then we get Pascal-cased column headings, and also sometimes they're just not friendly, right? Telling a user what album art URL is doesn't mean anything to them. And we also, why do we have name and name? How'd that happen? Right, because remember, this is from the artist table, this is from the genre table. So we've got 4 column headings here, sorry, 5 column headings, but only 2 of them are any good. So there's 2 ways we can fix this. One is in the view, we could just hard code in new column headings, but there's a better way of doing this because that means every place, right, we get the same issue here. We can globally create an alias for any column heading. So any place that column is referenced or there's a label, we're displaying a friendly name instead. So maybe instead of album art URL, both here and here, we want it to say album cover with a space. So we will add friendly column names. In the time we have, we should be able to do all of this stuff. So what we're going to do is divide and conquer. All right, how many tabs? We're going to leave out the filtering for now because that one's kind of a big job. So we'll just kind of put that one to the side for the moment. So this is going to be done in the view. View. There's one more thing. Look at the price values. Jake, what'd you do with them? Okay. All right. So you guys are going to work together on this. Work with the people at your table. Feel free to move if you like. We'll maybe work for about, we'll see where people are at in 15 or 20 minutes. Take on 2 of these tasks as a group. Pick 2 you want to tackle. And see what customizations, then we can kind of put them all together. Yes.
I did my own connection. I don't have the same, I got all the data database.
Okay. So my code is on GitHub. I'm going to stop the stream now. There's no point recording for a while. I can maybe start again, create a little video at the end where we put all these things together. Okay? So see how far you guys can get making those customizations. But I suggest some groups, this half of the room, you guys start at the bottom of the list and go up. You guys start, these 4 groups, you start at the top of the list and go down. Okay?